The cameras caught him walking in. They never caught him walking out. That's the whole case right there, in one sentence. A 27-year-old man walks into a bar on a Friday night in a busy part of a major American city, surrounded by people, surrounded by security cameras, and then he is simply gone. Not seen leaving, not seen on the street, not on any other camera anywhere, as if the building swallowed him whole. His name was Brian Shaffer. He was a medical student. He had a girlfriend he was talking about marrying. He had a whole life laid out in front of him. And on the first night of his spring break, in the spring of 2006, he went out for a few drinks to celebrate. He never came home. He has never been found. And to this day, no one can tell you how a grown man vanished out of a bar that had one way in and one way out, with the cameras rolling the entire time. I've looked at a lot of disappearances. Most of them have a gap, a dark stretch of road, an empty house, a moment no one saw. This one doesn't. This one happened in plain sight, on tape, in the middle of a crowd. And that's exactly what makes it so hard to let go of. This is the disappearance of Brian Shaffer. Let me tell you who he was first, because it matters. Brian Shaffer was 27 years old, and he was in his second year of medical school at Ohio State University in Columbus. If you know anything about med school, you know what that means. This was not a drifter. This was not someone on the edge of things. This was a disciplined, intelligent young man, halfway to becoming a doctor, with years of hard work already behind him and a clear future in front of him. People who knew him described him as warm, funny, the kind of guy who lit up a room. He played guitar. He had a serious girlfriend, a young woman he'd been with for a long time, and the two of them had been talking about getting married. By every account, Brian had every reason in the world to want to be here. But there was a shadow over that spring. Just a few weeks before that night, Brian's mother had died, cancer, and those who were close to him said he was grieving hard. He'd been very close with her. So here is a young man carrying real, fresh pain, but also a young man with a future, a partner, a calling. I'm telling you all of this now because every single theory about what happened to Brian Shaffer leans on one of these two truths: the grief or the future. Hold both of them in your mind. We'll need them later. So, the night itself. It's Friday, March 31st, 2006, the very start of spring break. Classes are out, the pressure is off, and Brian decides to go out for the evening. He's with a friend, another young man he knew, and the plan is simple. A few bars, a few drinks, blow off some steam. They start the night at one bar, have some drinks, and then later in the evening, they make their way to a place called the Ugly Tuna Saloona. It's a bar up on an upper level of a big shopping and entertainment complex in the South Campus area, a development called the Gateway. To get up to the bar, you ride an escalator up from the street level. The cameras at that complex would become the most studied footage of Brian's life. At some point that night, Brian's phone is active. He's in contact with people. There's nothing strange in the early hours. Just a guy out at a bar at the start of a break, like thousands of other students in that city on that same night. The bar is busy. It's loud. It's the kind of place where you can lose track of someone in the crowd without thinking twice. And at some point in those crowded, ordinary hours, Brian Shaffer steps out of view of the people he came with, and out of the story entirely.
Here's what the cameras actually show, because this is the part that everyone fixates on, and for good reason. The security footage from the gateway captured Brian arriving. You can see him riding up the escalator toward the bar. You can see him going in. At one point, the footage shows him near the entrance of the Ugly Tuna, standing there, apparently talking to two women. He steps back into the bar. And that is the last confirmed image of Brian Shaffer that exists in the world. Now think about what surrounds that bar. There's the main entrance, the one with the escalators, the one the cameras are pointed at. People come and go through it all night, and the cameras dutifully record them. Investigators went through that footage. They watched the people leaving. They were looking for one specific man, a man whose face they knew, whose clothes they knew, and he is not there. He never rides the escalator back down. He never walks out the front the way he walked in. So the obvious question becomes the impossible question. If he didn't leave through the only monitored entrance, then how did he leave at all? Did he find another way out? And if he did, why would he? And where, in a city full of cameras and streets and people, did he go after that without ever appearing again?
Now, I want to be careful and honest here, because this case attracts a lot of exaggeration, and I'm not going to feed you a ghost story. The bar was not a sealed box. There were other doors. There was, at the time, construction going on around parts of that complex. There were service areas, backways, the kinds of routes that exist in any large building. So it is not, strictly speaking, physically impossible that Brian found some other way out. But here's the weight of it. Those other routes were checked, the areas were searched, and none of them put Brian back out onto a street, onto a camera, into a taxi, into anything. If he left through some back way, he left into a dead zone and then evaporated. No sighting, no transaction on his bank card, no use of his phone that led anywhere, no body, nothing. That's the thing that elevates this above a simple, he slipped out a side door. Because slipping out a side door still leaves you somewhere. You still have to walk down a street. You still exist in the city. And Brian Shaffer, from the moment he stepped back into that bar, simply stopped existing as far as the physical record is concerned. One way in, one way out, the cameras watching, and a man who used neither.
Let's talk about the phone, because it's one of the strangest details. In the hours and days after Brian vanished, people called his cell phone over and over. And for a while, in the immediate aftermath, the phone didn't behave like a phone that had been smashed or dumped in a river. It rang. The calls went through and rang out. To some people, that suggested the phone was still on, still out there somewhere, sitting in the world, just never answered. And then, eventually, nothing. The phone went silent for good. No more ringing, no signal to chase. Another thread, picked up, followed for a few feet, and then cut. Quick thing before we go on. If these are the kinds of cases that keep you up at night the way they do me, then do me a favor and subscribe. This channel lives on these stories, the ones that were closed but never solved, and there's a new one every week. Okay, back to it. Because the silence of that phone is really the silence of the whole case. Every avenue that should have led somewhere, the cameras, the phone, the bank records, the exits, led to the same place: a wall. Brian's family and the police pulled every thread they had, and every single one of them came apart in their hands. I have to tell you about Brian's father, because this case is, in a lot of ways, his story too. Brian's dad was named Randy, and when his son vanished, Randy Shaffer did what any father would do. He refused to stop. He searched. He pushed the investigation. He talked to anyone who would listen. He kept his son's name and his son's face in front of the public year after year, trying to shake loose the one detail, the one witness, the one tip that might bring Brian home. Think about the weight this man was carrying. He had just lost his wife, Brian's mother, to cancer weeks before, and now his son had disappeared into thin air. A man grieving his wife and searching for his child at the same time. And here is the cruel ending to his part of the story. Randy Shaffer died in 2008, just a couple of years after Brian vanished. He went to his grave with that question still open, still bleeding. I think about that a lot with these cases. The families, the people who don't get the luxury of an ending, who just have to live and then die inside the not knowing. Brian's disappearance didn't take one person from this world. It hollowed out everyone who loved him, and at least one of them carried that hole to the end.
So what happened to Brian Shaffer? Over the years, the theories have settled into a few main shapes. Let me walk you through them honestly, because not one of them closes the case. The first theory is that he left on his own, that he walked away from his life deliberately. And the reason people reach for this one is the grief. Remember, his mother had just died. The thinking goes that in that pain, Brian decided to disappear, to start over somewhere new, or worse, to end things himself. But it doesn't sit cleanly. If he walked away to start a new life, how? With no money moving, no card ever used, no trace, no sighting for all these years. People who vanish voluntarily almost always leave some ripple eventually. Brian left none. And if he meant to harm himself, where? The areas around that complex were searched. No body was ever found. For the self-harm theory to be true, he'd have had to do it somewhere no one ever looked and somehow never turned up. Possible, but it leaves the same hole as everything else.
The second theory is foul play, that someone harmed Brian that night and his disappearance wasn't a choice at all. And naturally, over the years, attention has fallen on the people who were around him that night, the friend he went out with, the last people seen near him. Investigators looked hard at the company Brian kept that evening. That's normal, that's what you do. But I want to be very clear because it matters. No one has ever been charged. No one has ever been proven to have done anything to Brian Shaffer. Suspicion is not proof, and a lot of innocent people end up under a cloud simply for being the last to see someone alive. So I'm not going to stand here and point a finger at a named person who was never charged with a crime. That's not what this channel does.
What I can tell you is that the foul play theory runs into the same brutal problem as all the others. There is no body, there is no scene, there is no physical evidence tying anyone to a crime, just a young man who was there 1 second and gone the next. Every road in this case leads to the same dead end, the absence of Brian himself.
And that's really what makes the Brian Shaffer case so maddening and so unforgettable. We are used to old mysteries having an excuse. No cameras, no forensics, a different century. The Hinterkaifeck farm, 1890-something tools and superstition. The cases where you think, well, of course they couldn't solve it. Look at what they had to work with. Brian Shaffer vanished in 2006 in a city, in a modern building with surveillance cameras running, with a cell phone in his pocket, with bank cards and records and all the digital threads that are supposed to make it impossible for a person to just disappear anymore. And he did it anyway. That's the horror of this one. Not a dark forest, not a lonely road. The opposite. He vanished inside the very systems that are supposed to make vanishing impossible. He was on camera, and the camera has no answer. The technology that watches all of us all the time watched Brian Shaffer walk into a bar, and then it had nothing more to say. How do you solve a disappearance when the last evidence is a man on tape standing in a doorway, alive? Where do you even begin when the trail doesn't go cold somewhere out in the dark, but right there, in the light, in the middle of everyone?
So, I'll leave it with you the way I always do. Brian Shaffer was 27. He was going to be a doctor. He'd just lost his mother, and he was thinking about marrying the woman he loved. He went out one night to forget his grief for a few hours, and he walked into a bar and out of the world. And no camera, no phone, no search, no grieving father has ever been able to follow him. What do you think happened in that place? Did he find a way out and choose to disappear into his own pain? Did someone take that choice away from him? Or is this one of those cases that was built from the very first second to never be solved? Tell me in the comments. I read them. And on this one, I really want to know where you land, because I've gone back and forth myself, and I still don't have an answer I trust. I'm Gravenfield, the cases that were closed but never solved. If you made it this far, you're my kind of person. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves out there.